Patep, Uncle Jasaneb, and all of that good stuff. I'm here with Dewey and Paulie, and we're going to be talking about the debut issue of Superman in Action Comics #1 from 1938.
Cover dated June 1938. When would that have actually come out? Would that have been like April?
I think it was April. It was either March or April, but I think it was April if I remember right.
Yeah. There's a whole thing about magazines being cover dated ahead of time for some reason I don't remember or know.
One of the confusing mysteries of comics.
If it's anything like today, it's probably it could be because of deadlines, and just trying to make sure you got everything printed before you need it. Yeah.
Maybe they thought it would sell more if it looked like it came from the future.
There was a lot of wacky ideas going on about children's publications back in those days, so that's possible, right?
Anyway, let's talk about this comic that is 10 cents on the cover. And how much would it be now? It's like millions of dollars, right?
Oh yeah. I saw a page from it that had an advertisement. In an auction, it sold for I think it was like $7,000 just for that one page. And it was, it's crazy. It passed the million mark a long time ago. So you're not going to get one of these unless you do it by ill-gotten means, right? Unless you get to 7 figures and up is where it's going to start.
Seriously,
yeah, because this is the one that kind of kicked off everything. So it has a lot of cultural importance in regards to comic books and also American culture, because this is basically the beginning of the superhero, and it would actually lead into superheroes becoming modern day folk characters. So like all of the big ones, like Superman, Spider-Man, Batman, Wonder Woman, Captain America, and all of those people, we tell American folklore with those characters now. Like we don't think about it because we're in the moment, but they serve the same purpose culturally as like Pecos Bill or Paul Bunyan or any of those characters, from the past. I wanted to get you guys idea. Let's talk about the cover first. I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the cover, Paulie, I wanted to get do you remember when you actually saw the cover for the first time, whether it was actually on a reprint book or something like that, or whether it was just as like a poster or whatever? I wanted to talk about that to get you guys' reaction on it.
I don't think I remember seeing it. I think it's just one of those pop culture things that's just always been there. As far as your memory is concerned, it's always been around. But I reckon I probably saw the homages to it before I ever actually saw the actual cover. Like there's a famous Todd McFarlane cover of Spider-Man junking a car into a fountain or something. So that I probably saw that before I ever saw Action Comics #1. But as far as the specific time, it's just always been there in my brain,
Yeah.
First time I saw a Shuster Superman is in this book.
Wow.
Oh wow. Which what's the name of that book?
Marvel Five Fabulous Decades of the World's Greatest Comics.
Oh wow. Okay.
Wow. The first time I saw a glimpse of Golden Age Joe Shuster Superman is in a Marvel it's in a book about Marvel Comics.
Wow, that's crazy. And an anniversary book at that.
An anniversary book, because you can't tell the story of superheroes without telling the story of Superman.
Yeah.
It's basically what it is. But the first time I saw the cover must have been this book. I'm assuming it was this book.
Oh, right.
DC Comics, 60 years of the world's favorite comic book superheroes. And must have been here because I'd feel really stupid if it wasn't. Yep, it's right there.
Yep.
So,
wow.
Unless it was reprinted elsewhere that I didn't know about, but that's the first time I remember seeing it. It looked. I've mentioned before how I had these biases when it came to art, so I thought that you had to look like George Perez or John Byrne to be considered a good artist. So when
Mhm.
I saw it, I was like, what? This is what comics look like back in the day? You gotta be kidding me. What's with that
Yeah.
S? That doesn't even look like his S.
That's
Yeah.
exactly what I thought. My first experience of Schuster Superman was in this,
Mhm.
and it was the one of the first Superman Luthor fights, and yeah, I just couldn't believe how crude it looked, you know.
Yeah.
And obviously now I love it, but at the time I was like you say, what the hell is this?
Right?
You know?
It's like,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah.
But it just made its way back and back and back into my brain. And then the more I grew up, the more I appreciated the crudeness and the power of it. Especially, I mean, we've talked about this. Kurt Swan had the longest run on the character, but I always found his work a little too clinical. And Joe Shuster is the exact opposite of that.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny that you mentioned that before I go into my first exposure to it. When you say that, it's almost like in some ways Joe Schuster, he was like he was giving us an idea of what was going to come in like another 25 years when Kirby comes and he does what he does with, and he develops his singular style that way, right? Because, you know, whenever Superman does anything, like even if he's like reaching for a coffee mug or something, there's a lot of power in it, you know? And I think he made really good use of lines. Like he didn't really waste lines, right? Like today, if you don't know how to draw something, you can hide it behind a shadow or you can cross hatch it or something like that. But in these days, those types of techniques, you know, like the technique of comic book storytelling hadn't evolved, yet because we're at the beginning. So he couldn't rely on any of that stuff. So the stuff that he drew, he like had to know how to draw it, or else he just didn't draw it,
You had to be
right? So
anatomically correct. You had to
yes,
be, yeah, you had to have the
yeah,
gesture
because
down.
you got to have everything because you're trying to sell this thing. Because it's like when you see Superman here and he's lifting up a car, it actually has to look like somebody lifting up a car, to get people to buy it because they never seen it before. And so him just taking it and smashing it into a rock or whatever, people are like, not only is he lifting it up, like he's gonna turn this thing into a tin can in a minute, and these guys are like running crazy and all of that. And so you also have in the background there's like this burst of energy, right? And so that goes a long way to selling the image, because even though it's kind of like it's almost in a weird way like how comic panels are set up. They're set up like cameras now, right? So with this, it literally looks like somebody from Time Magazine heard about this guy, went down there, and then was like they caught him in action. So this would win like like a Pulitzer or something like that, or whatever if it was real. So you have the energy burst in the back that goes a long way to convey Superman's power. Like it's almost like if him lifting up a car and smashing it isn't enough. You know what I mean? So, yeah, there's a lot going on in the cover. It's really, really dynamic, even though it looks simple. There's a lot happening.
Let me point this out too. We mentioned this is where the superhero genre takes off, which is
Mhm.
true, but there were precursors. So, the
Yeah,
Phantom had been around, Flash
right.
Gordon,
Yeah,
but this was completely different. Like just
yeah,
visually, it was just completely different, which is completely sold by that dude on the bottom left.
yeah. The guy, he's like, oh my God. Yeah, he's like the guy who's like, you're looking at it through his eyes. Like if it was you there, you'd just be like, especially if you were a criminal, like, hey man, I'm out of here, man. This is insane. Like I'm gonna get a job buffing floors or something now. I'm done. Right. So
And
I always
the
wondered about the people who saw that for the first time with like no context of who Superman was. Like,
right.
did they think he was a bad guy and these three were
mm,
like innocent people?
Hmm.
You have
Yeah,
no idea. You have no context.
yeah,
I reread the story this morning, and this guy is called Butch.
yeah. Hmm.
Which I love that he's got a name.
Yeah.
You know?
And it's like the common tough guy name from
Yeah.
like from fiction literature back then. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, but
What was
my
your first exposure, LaMar?
um man, for me, like I've told this story on here before. Like I had my exposure to comics when I was a little boy. I got all my comics like from thrift shops and yard sales and things. So when I was coming up in the 80s, like a lot of these comics were like from the 50s and the 60s and stuff like that. But um there was a comic that I was reading, and it had like an advertisement or something in it, and it had the cover in it, right? And so I was like, hey, that's actually kind of cool. So then I had asked, I asked my people, so I asked my dad, peace be upon him. I was like, hey, how long has Superman been out? He was like, Superman, came out around the same time I did, right? So and he was like, yeah, man, we all had that kind of stuff. But he was like, I can remember I had the first issue when Batman came out where he was flying across the cover, and he's got the buildings behind him and stuff. And at that point, I had never seen it, so I didn't know what he was talking about. But he was like, yeah, I had that, and I used to read the mess out of it. But then we would take the pages and fold them up and stick them in our bicycles to make the noises, the and all of that, because we didn't know this stuff was going to be worth anything. So we were children enjoying it, so we didn't know anything about that. But then I just got to, I actually found, the reprint of it. One of them came up in 1988. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna just go ahead and read it. But when I opened it, like the art style and stuff, I was just like, hey man, listen, this is not as detailed as the stuff like you see now. Because this is like post Neil Adams and all of that kind of stuff.
Of
So
course,
you
yeah.
have you have these more realistic renderings of characters and environments. So as I'm looking at it, and I'm like, it's not as detailed as that stuff, like, but like the action itself, because Action Comics, of course, the action sells it, because you can't rely on the realism or anything, but you have to get everything to make it look right. So you're talking about draftsmanship, you're talking about obviously you're talking about photo referencing, because you know uh you have an actual car. It's not something that was made up like a spaceship or anything. It's an actual car. So you have to utilize all of those things, and you have to use them to their maximum effect, and you have no real blueprint, because like this, like you said, it was something different, you know. And I thought it was cool because it even looked like the daily comics that come out with the newspaper. And see, I love that stuff. So like even today, like, people think it's funny, but like I like to read like, Mark Trail and Rex Morgan. Like, and people are like, why do you read that? But I love it because I love the art style. So, and it's similar to this in a lot of ways. But I loved it. And so I just wanted to go and find the rest of them. And then my mom, peace be upon her, was like, man, these things are like really expensive now, so they're not
Yes.
10 cents anymore. So
Yes, they are.
yeah, so I didn't have I didn't have like a mind of that, because all of my comic books, I got them secondhand really. But even though back then I think comics were what, like they were like still like around 50 cents or something like that.
Around the
Like they
time. Yeah.
yeah, around the time that I first got into them. So, but yeah,
Let,
that was
let,
my first exposure to it.
let's bring something else up here too. I mean, couple of things. Little bit lost to history. I was telling a friend that we were gonna do this, this episode, and I said it's
Mm-hmm.
the first appearance of Superman, and she said, I just realized he looks like a circus strongman
Mm-hmm.
because he
Yeah.
does. That's what it's based off of, his
Mm-hmm.
costume. And
Yeah.
because circuses have fallen out of fashion, nobody really knows that anymore.
Yeah, because Ringling Brothers is done now. Like you can you still have certain joints like the Cirque du Soleil, and you have like the there's a couple of other small ones and stuff like that, but they focus like on more of human performances instead of like the animals and things.
Uh-huh.
So that you don't have like the animal cruelty stuff. But yeah, just most children really, they don't know too much about that, like that circus experience now. So it's kind of fallen by the wayside. So, and it's one of the things people are always like, well, why is he wearing his underwear on the outside? And you try to explain to him, it's like, yo, people in the circus would do that because when they were doing like sleight of hand tricks and stuff, like the strong man, when he would do things, sometimes he would hide things in his trunks, you
Yep.
know. And so it was a way for him to, for the performers to go in there and get things to do stuff. And so and then also they would also have on like this unitard thing, and then it would just kind of be like a color break. So the same aesthetic from the circus makes its way into um the superhero genre, we also see the thing about concealment later in Batman's utility belt. It's the same concept, right? So,
Batman also wears his underwear outside of his pants,
yeah,
and
and he
nobody ever
also
talks about that.
right, you know. So, really, I mean, really, it's just a silly argument. That's all it is. There's no basis for that. I mean, if you like, if you rather not see it, that's one thing. But to say that, oh, well, this is dumb and this is that, no, it's not, dude. You just have to accept the fact that it comes from an era where people's main mode of entertainment when they wanted to see like Wonderman and things like that was a circus, even when people didn't have TVs, because TV was kind of a new thing then still. So not everybody had a TV in their house.
It's a
So
rich person's thing.
yeah, it was a luxury. So people would go down to the corner store to listen to boxing matches on the radio. They didn't have a radio either. So that kind of stuff. But yeah, and I think that particular aspect of Superman is one of those things that kind of has to stay in place. I think, and this cover is a really good reason why. Because it's just like like you said, I can imagine being a child in the late 30s and seeing something like this, and you're just like, wow.
No
You know
idea.
what I mean? Yeah. And it cranks up when you get into the first page. And this first page is funny to me now because there's this thing in comics where you have this idea that if you can't tell a character's origin story in 6 panels or less, you need to do it over, right? So you have panels of text and dialogue and stuff like that. But so the first time you actually see Superman in costume is on the first page. Like now that's kind of a rarity now. You know what I mean? So, but the funny thing about it is that there's they actually go through the labors of explaining how Superman's strength works. I just love that. And
It's
they
the
use
one at the
ants
bottom,
and
right?
grasshoppers.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know what I think it is? So one thing is, scientific explanation of Clark Kent's amazing strength. Sure.
Yeah.
And they feel maybe he's a sci-fi hero, and this is kind of a hard sell. So
Yeah.
this is like the 1938 equivalent to the Marvel Cinematic Universe saying in 2011 that the Asgardians are aliens.
Right.
Yeah. It's like trying to bring that down. But also, I think they just finished the Superman thing early and they had 2 extra panels left.
Yeah.
And
that, because a lot of this stuff, the ideas that are the best, a lot of times they come like that, and they come out of necessity. It's like, man, yeah, like you said, you got 2 more panels left. Like today, they just would have done a picture of him flying with the sky behind him or something, right? But they were like, listen, this is what we're gonna do. I can draw ants pretty good, right? so
don't forget grasshoppers.
Yeah, I could do this. So this is what we're going to do. I got, listen, we're going to do it like this. Yeah. How are we going to explain this? We're going to explain it with ants and grasshoppers, which honestly, it's actually rooted in sound science. So, this is another thing that you would later see, right? In comics and things like that. Because a lot of times if you want to make like a fantasy thing, like go off, you have to ground it in something that's real, even if people don't understand it. Right. So, that was actually a really good choice. But every time I see it, like, because it looks like the ant is like picking up like a girder or something. That's what it looks like, so it's just funny to me when I see it, and it just makes me smile.
It looks like a girder. It's probably a stem.
Yeah, that's what I always
like
took it as a stem. Yeah, like a green girder. But yeah, it's probably just a stem from a leaf or whatever. But yeah, like just and then so Dewey, I'm gonna go to you this time. As far as like the structure of the page, I wanted to talk about that just a little bit.
I love it. I love it. Well, if they conceive this as a newspaper strip, so you can kind of see how everything here is in 3 rows, right? And theoretically, you'd be able to read every row like on each day. So it does make sense. But what I think is really funny, notable, is one, Jerome Siegel and Joe Shuster are credited right away, which is not that common back then. But there are the Kents aren't here.
Right.
There's nothing about him getting adopted. There's nothing about the word Krypton isn't here. There's nothing about
Mhm.
Jor-El. There's nothing about
Yeah.
Kal-El.
Mhm.
And my favorite thing is it shows his three main powers: leap an eighth of a mile to hurdle a 20-story building,
Mhm.
slash hurdle a 20-story building, raise tremendous weights, and run faster than an express train. It's not quite faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, and able to leap tall buildings in a single bound.
Right.
But it's like it was already kind of building up to that. I thought that was pretty hilarious.
Mhm.
And it there's so much on this page, by the way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's 10 panels on this page and a whole lot of text, but it doesn't really feel it doesn't feel too compressed. And
Yeah.
the main thing too, I want to point out, Superman, champion of the oppressed. For the people who continue to say comics have never been political, champion of the oppressed.
Yeah. So, and for those of y'all who are not scientifically literate and stuff, this is what we call source criticism, right? This is the first comic for a superhero, period, right? And we haven't even gotten off the first page, and you already done. So, yeah, we will keep going. I just want to point that out.
And one last thing, when the vehicle landed on Earth, his spaceship, a passing motorist discovering the sleeping babe within turned the child over to the orphanage. That would not happen today.
No way does that happen today. Definitely not.
I'm going to go ahead and say it probably doesn't happen in 1938.
Yeah, that's actually, especially considering, where Superman is said to have grown up at. Yeah, that probably wouldn't have happened because, a super strong child that's pretty much impervious to pain relatively in this time, even though he's not as powerful as he would later be, will come in real handy around the farm. So, and you ain't got to pay him. So, you know what I mean? Yeah, and this is like you're coming out of like the Great Depression era and stuff like that too. So it was just a really good time for a comic like this to come out.
Yeah.
But Paulie, you got anything you want to add to it, bro?
Well, yeah, but firstly, I just want to point out, he was saying earlier on about how, people didn't realize the comics were so disposable back then. People didn't realize how important this was going to be. On the inside front cover, there's an advert encouraging you to chop up the comic, basically.
Yeah.
It's a colouring competition encouraging you to colour in the first page of the Chuck Dawson strip, which is also the last page of the Superman strip.
Right.
And colour it in, rip it out, and post it off.
True.
Yeah.
And if you're chosen, you could win $1. So
yeah, like I said,
you chopped up your Action Comics #1 and won $1
and got $1 in return.
Does that reprint have all of the ads? So like the Chuck Dawson strip literally is.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
It's in there. And I checked. You can actually get that reprint that Paulie has. You can get it for relatively cheap. Like it's not hard to come by. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that's one of my favorite parts. It's kind of gone away now. But just the ads and stuff that would be in comics, like if you go like from period to period to period and how they change and stuff like that, that's like in a lot of ways, just studying the history of comics, that's one of the most interesting parts about comics, is those kinds of things. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I think, speaking to what Dewey was saying about the design, like it doesn't seem like it's like super like smashed in. Because but at the same time, the daily strip thing is there, but it's because of the way the panels are set up. Like you have, like when you go to the bottom, by the time you get to the bottom, like everything just kind of comes down like this. It starts with you have just like your regular rectangular panel, and then you have a slim one, and then you have one that's a little slimmer than the first one, and then you have the wide panels that are stacked on top of one another, and then when you get down to the bottom one. You have the small panel of Superman, and then the rest of it's taken up with the ants and the grasshoppers, which is I'm gonna be on that forever. That is just so cool to me.
Isn't it crazy that the first shot of Superman in this book is that tiny little panel that would never happen?
No, it wouldn't happen today. It would be a whole page.
A whole page.
Yeah, it would
Do you know
definitely be a
there's
whole
something
page.
that strikes me about the story though, and the way that page is structured and stuff, is that nobody cared about origins back then.
No, no.
Um,
Mm-mm.
and people say now that origins is so important. It's like, oh, well, you've got to redo the origin if you reboot the films because it's not fair to people who aren't familiar with it and blah blah blah. And
Mm,
it's like
mm,
people never used to care about the origins. Like all the other strips in the comic, it doesn't tell us who Zatara is, how
yeah,
Zatara got his powers.
yeah.
And when Superman was transferred to radio shortly after this came out,
Mhm, yeah.
um, it was like they talked about the destruction of Krypton. He grew up from a baby to a man in his rocket and come out of his rocket in full costume. Like,
Hmm.
it's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
origins weren't so important back then. And I'm not saying I don't like a good origin story, but I do feel like there's too much focus on it. Like we'll revisit it every few years in the comics. Like, oh, there's something about Superman's origin that we never knew before. And it's like, never mind his origin. What's he doing now?
Yeah.
And that's what
Yeah,
this story is concerned with. Doesn't matter where he came from. What's he up to now?
yeah.
And it's really interesting. When you think about articles like I read this article years ago by Joe Casey, the comics writer,
Mm,
and he was saying how like Superman's origin story is the only really good Superman story and the only Superman story worth telling. And it's interesting how in the very first Superman story, that just shows how that's a load of rubbish because
right, right.
they don't
Yeah,
care about the origin in the first Superman story. It's all about what can Superman do right now,
yeah,
and I think we should get back to that a bit more. You know.
I
yeah.
agree.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
definitely. And another thing I wanted to say too is you know, I feel like just because like when we get into the story, or before we get into that, I feel like this, and it seems to be the case just from research that I was doing, is that we get the concept of an origin story as we see it today. Ultimately, it comes out of the necessity of this comic because when you have this person doing all this crazy stuff, you have to explain how they're able to do it in some kind of way, right? Or else you run the risk of people getting detached from it and then it just doesn't take off, right? So um, they kept it obviously to one page because, like you said, they weren't really concerned with it all that much. But it's like, hey, they've never seen this before. We got to kind of run them through it, and then we end the page with the insects. And then once we get into the next joint, it's just him doing what he does. Like there's literally no like there's no type of thing where like he hears somebody screaming or something and then he's like, oh well, I gotta go handle this. There's none of that. This guy gets out, he basically becomes Superman, in that bottom panel. And then the next thing is him literally going from place to place and beating people up for doing immoral things. Right. So like the first panel is like he has this woman who's been, she's tied up and has her mouth covered and stuff, and then he takes her and puts her down on the ground, and then he's like, hey, listen, I'm
Which,
gonna handle
by
it like
the
this.
way, Joe Shuster, clearly his strong suit is not perspective because either Superman is really far up above the ground here or he's a giant. You can look at
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
you can
yeah,
look at this
yeah,
either way. He's clearly not
yeah,
putting that much effort into perspective here. It's like
yeah.
it's a
You see what
house.
I'm saying? Yeah. So yeah, but in a way though, it works. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And it's weird how it works, but it actually does, because he puts the woman down. Once he jumps and then he puts the woman down, he's like, hey, listen, I'm gonna go take care of this light work real quick. And then he goes in here and he just picks the guy up and walks up the steps with him like this. So I can imagine being a child and being like, whoa, or even being an adult and just looking like, whoa, he just picked the guy up like that. And it's, the guy, you know what I mean? It's great. It's great. It's just, there's constant motion. Like he's always moving. And it's the same thing, like we talked about with the comic, the cartoon. Yeah.
Yeah.
We talked about
Fleischers.
that. The
Yeah.
Fleischer Superman. Yeah, we talked about that and how he's always moving. And in this book, like literally from panel to panel, he's, even when he's standing still, he's doing something, like you can feel it, and he's literally going from thing to thing. And once he solves that, he goes somewhere else and he's throwing somebody else out a window, so it's just constant motion. which Grant Morrison actually used when he did his Action Comics run for the New 52. He used that really, really well, that conceptualization of the constant motion. Yeah.
There is a stop in the motion here, which is when Superman rips the steel door off its hinges when he's going to the governor.
Mm-hmm.
And then he just rips it off, and then he tells apparently the governor's butler, even though he looks like a henchman.
Right. Same thing here.
You know, he just looks at him and he's like, "It was your idea," which is like, which feels like such a modern movie moment. You know, it's like just undercutting the seriousness of the situation, and it's like, yeah, it was your idea.
It's really interesting how, Siegel, Shuster, to working class Jewish kids,
Mm-hmm.
and the first thing they write Superman doing is being stopped from entering somewhere by an employee of a rich person,
Mm-hmm.
and then fighting past him. It's a literal butler saying you can't come in here, and he just beats him up and goes in anyway, kind of thing. And
Mm-hmm.
so straight away you've got that sort of working class Jewish wish fulfillment and settling a
Yeah.
few scores kind of thing going on there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then the butler just produces a gun and shoots him.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then he tells him, he's like, "Hey, reach for the ceiling," right?
I love this whole thing that Schuster does, where he just puts a little clock at the bottom of the at the bottom right of the panel. A life hangs in the balance. 12 minutes to go. Don't you realize I've proved she's innocent, and you alone can save her. 9 minutes to go. Apparently, that whole line took like 3 minutes to say.
Hey, and also because there's so many quotables in this issue. When you go back to the page where it's like, it was your idea when you tore the door down, he pulls the gun out, and then Superman's like, "Hey, put that toy away, man." You know what I mean? And he's dead serious. That's the funny thing about it. It's hilarious. And then he shoots him, and of course nothing happens. But yeah, just little stuff like that. Like they were constantly displaying, okay, you dealing with something else entirely now. You know what I mean?
Schuster's so much about the movement of the human body that the butler shooting Superman is actually not one of the most dynamic things on the page.
Right.
Because it's just two people standing. It's just, and also it doesn't show it bouncing off his skin or anything.
No, you just see the cloud of smoke, and then when he shoots him, and then it kind of looks like he shot him in the neck, and then
That's
just
true.
him getting bum rushed by Superman for even bothering. You know what I mean? And so it's like, and then but yeah, so you have this thing where like you said about the clock, you have this thing that's already in place where it's kind of like he's racing to the train before it runs off the track. You know what I mean? So you have that element to it too, like where he comes in and he's doing the last minute saves and stuff like that. Like it's, so you already starting to see a lot of these elements that would later be evolved later. You know what I mean? And it's really, really interesting. And then finally you see Superman, you see him as Clark Kent for the first time. So it's kind of the other way around than how you normally see it, because normally he's Clark Kent, then something happens and then he becomes Superman. So I think on a psychological level, that actually, it was good that they did it this way, because it's like Superman's the main attraction here. Clark Kent is just kind of who he is whenever he's not being Superman. It's just something for him to do so he can just kind of walk around amongst normal people. So this, the other stuff hadn't been established yet, as far as like his upbringing in Smallville and things like that. Like that hadn't happened yet.
Seriously, start shit off this way. Just like,
yeah,
when you introduce, I don't know, give me a superhero that hasn't shown up in the movies yet.
Oh, Booster Gold.
Sure, I mean that's the worst possible example, but okay. First time you show Booster Gold, like, just show him in his costume, being a dick, pretending to save lives. There's no need to show Michael John Carter right away. Nobody cares.
Funny enough, it's weird that I randomly picked that character, but Dan Jurgens doesn't give Booster's origin for a good few issues in the original. So that was actually quite a good example.
Yeah.
By the way, that was a dig at our friend Matt Jory,
Wow.
Booster Gold, whose favorite
Shots.
character is Booster Gold. Yeah, okay. Anyway, go on.
Yeah. It is funny because apparently Superman, he comes out the gate and he's doing all this crazy stuff, but yet he's still trying to kind of remain anonymous. And so when we see him as Clark Kent, he walks out and he's seeing this guy reading the newspaper, and he's talking about how, because the night before he left the guy when they stayed the execution. He left him a note, was like, hey, all these dudes is tied up at your house, you go out there and catch them. I left them there. And then the next morning he sees this guy reading the paper and he's like, hey, let me see that. And he takes the paper and he's like, oh good, they didn't mention my name or whatever, you know what I mean? There's like these little things that are in this book that would just be so ridiculous today, right? But they're great though, and they add a lot of charm. And
A little bit of
gives,
trivia for anybody
yeah.
watching. So Clark Kent says, "Good, I'm not mentioned" in this like jagged thought balloon, jagged dialogue balloon thing. That's actually a thought balloon in 1938. That's not a whisper.
Yeah, it's a thought balloon. Yep. Yep.
I don't know when it changes, but yeah. There you go.
Yep. So yeah, this book has a series of firsts in a lot of ways. And so, I really think that I don't care what kind of comics that you read that you like. I really think you owe it to yourself to go back and read this comic, because a lot of stuff that you see now is still in place. And then there's some things you don't see, but maybe you'll appreciate them a little more. So one thing I wanted to ask y'all, because we start to see a little more of like Clark Kent and stuff like that now. So this is when he starts to do the whole thing where he's like where he overhears something or whatever, and then he's like, oh, gotta go. And then Superman shows up, right? Like, how well do you think, like when you talk about like today, because this is close to 90 years ago. So
yeah,
how do you think that something like that has aged, like in regards to today? Like, even though it's such like a ubiquitous part of who Superman is, like, like how do you guys feel about that?
you mean with more ability to find out what people are saying even when you're not in the conversation?
Right. Yeah.
I guess it's creepy, but it was always creepy if you think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know if it would have aged well or badly. It was just don't listen into everyone, Superman.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, even though you're Superman, not everything's your business, right? So
the fact that he's a reporter kind of makes it a little better, I guess, because like it's his job to be nosy. So
yeah. And he doesn't have his sensory powers yet. So so
I'll tell you what I don't think aged well. After that whole panel where he's like, good, I'm not mentioned, the governor talks to a bunch of officials and he's like, I can't believe my senses. He's not human. Thank heaven he's apparently on the side of law and order. That doesn't age well, because if that happened today, this guy would be like, we got to catch this guy and dissect him.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. Yeah, that hasn't aged very well at all. And it's no fault of the comic, it's everybody else's fault.
It is the world's fault.
Yeah. That's not the fault of the comic at all. But there was something else I wanted to bring up. Yeah. We start to see Superman interacting more with like other people that aren't criminals.
Yeah.
And I think that as he's starting to interact with the world around him, this is also something that you don't really see, because they kind of started off with him being Superman. So Clark Kent is just kind of a device for him to be Superman where other people can see him. But one of the things that I found intriguing about it, and this is something that John Byrne actually brought back, and this is one of the things that he got right with his Superman stuff, is that Superman in this comic really enjoys using his powers, and you can tell, right? Because he's always like telling people, like when like the guy pulls out the thing or whatever, like he's getting ready to hit him, And he's like, hey man, don't get tough. And then he picks him up like this, right? So you could tell he enjoys using his powers and stuff. But it's just an interesting, like, as they move away from those kinds of scenes, and like the guy gets so scared that he faints. That's another thing, right? Because he goes to stab him and the knife breaks, and then he just kind of faints and keels over. And then, Clark goes back to being Clark. He goes back to being Clark Kent, and the cops come in and they're like, hey, I don't know, man. You just, you know what I mean? And then like he kind of goes into, and he's,
this is the wife beater. Yeah.
Yeah. So, just those kinds of things. It's interesting because you have somebody who's essentially the bully for the bullies.
Yeah.
Right. So Superman kind of comes out of the gate as that. Like that's kind of his job. Like, I bully the bullies, I shake them down for their lunch money. You know what I mean? Y'all ain't got to worry about it no more. So I wanted to talk about that particular aspect of it. And, because this is kind of like a play on like how people were like, well, I like comics when they weren't political, right? And we're all sitting here like, when was that? Because this comic is really political, especially by today's standards, and the different themes and stuff that we see. Paulie, you don't have to get personal or nothing like that, but I just wanted to know kind of like what you guys thought about that in particular and how Superman's portrayed here.
I think it's an aspect of the character that people forget, but it's a really important aspect of the character.
Mm-hmm.
Like fans forget it mainly, although writers do as well. I think even though I really enjoyed Bendis's recent Superman run, one of the things he did, he went a bit too far on, was having Superman stop and try and talk to everyone all the time, like.
Mm-hmm.
And Superman's not Jesus. Superman's not a pacifist.
Right.
Superman doesn't like, beating people up for no reason, but he's not a pacifist,
Mm-hmm.
And
the title of the book is Action Comics.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. And this sort of like you say, beating up the bullies thing, it's such an important part of the character. And if they emphasize that a bit more, I think what people are getting from Batman, people would perhaps get it a bit more from Superman,
Mm-hmm.
But I think that some fans are quite fanatical about it. Because they see Superman as this Jesus pacifist figure. Like I've seen people on the internet criticizing the ending of Superman 2 when he beats up that guy in the bar and sends him flying across the bar.
Yeah.
Saying like, oh, that's not what Superman would do. And it's like, it definitely is. The bit in Man of Steel where Superman wrecks that guy's truck, people use that as a stick to beat Man of Steel with, and it's like, okay, well, if you don't like the movie, fine, but that
there
is
are so many sticks to beat it with.
Well, exactly. If you don't like the movie, fine, but that's not something that's out of character for the character. It just isn't.
Definitely not. Yeah.
You know what? I was watching Superman 2, the Donner cut a while back, and in that cut, it is out of character for him to beat up that guy at the bar.
It's stupid in the Donner cut because in the Donner cut, Superman's erased the initial bullying incident from history, so he's essentially just beating up some guy for no reason.
Who has never met him before.
So in the Donner cut, it doesn't work, but in the Lester cut, it definitely works. It's a beautiful note to end the film on. And so I think this is so important, this part of Superman, and I want to see more of it. And I don't know what that says about me. Maybe I'm a bit too violent, maybe.
No, I agree with you though, because I do think we love All-Star Superman, sure. Secret Origin, Superman of the Legion, all of that stuff about Superman, being inspirational and giving these big speeches and everything. Sure, those are great. Yeah. But I don't want it all the time.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We were talking about how the 90s was probably the most consistent period for Superman. And Superman's not like being this inspirational to everyone giving speeches figure during that whole thing. He's just having adventures during the 90s. Yeah. So I mean, stop having him talk so much is what I'm saying.
And this is it. It's like in the Bendis thing, in the Bendis run on Action Comics of Superman, he goes out of his way to have Superman try and talk with the baddie first. And then when he has to fight the baddie, it's like, oh, why is he making me fight him? And there is that side of Superman, I think, that's like, yeah, I get to kick this guy's ass now. I get to show him who's
Hmm.
boss, and that's not a bad thing. Like, if it's a baddie, you know.
Yeah, like that's what's supposed to happen,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
and if you're dealing with a person who's doing like horrible, despicable things,
Mm,
you have to talk their language sometimes. That's just because if you tell somebody, hey, listen, if you do that again, this is what's going to happen, and they decide to do it, it's on them, right? Because you've given them fair warning, and I think that that's what a lot of this is about, because you have this idea that's established in these comics that in this particular world that they've created, right, in which we later know, of course, superheroes took off, that there are repercussions for the things that you do that are not moral and upstanding,
Mhm.
right? And sometimes those repercussions are immediate. That's exactly the kind of message that we need, right? And so even if you look back during the time that this was happening, there were all sorts of things happening in the real world that this was actually a reflection of, you know. And you know, this particular comic, because you always have to be conscious of the world that the comic comes out of, right, to kind of understand it better. So in this particular time, you're talking about the late 30s and the early 40s. There were all sorts of things happening. Like I said, the United States, we had just went through prohibition, and then you're coming out of the Great Depression. But like in places that were already poor, the Great Depression kind of went on even longer because, of course, when you're poor, when things get turned upright, you're last in line, right?
Yeah.
So all of that stuff comes out of this, or this comes out of all of that. And there was some other things happening. And then it's kind of like comic books. Like once you deal with one problem, you get to breathe a few times, and then there's another problem, right? So it was like that. So now you have like the burgeoning civil rights movement and all of that stuff, like in the 40s, right? And there were all sorts of things happening, right? And we're not going to get into all that today, but moving on, this is one
Wait,
of my
time out before
yeah.
we move on to the next scenes.
Uh-huh.
I want to point out a few things. Number one, Clark Kent sees the paper. It's clearly from the Daily Star. He did not write that scoop.
Right.
He didn't write
Yep.
that scoop. Number two, he gets to the Daily Star. It's called the Daily Star. When you're talking about things, we're talking about things that didn't matter to people back then. His editor is never named.
Right.
This editor would eventually be named George Taylor. And then because of the radio show, it would eventually become Perry White. But this
Right.
editor is not named at all. Like, this does not matter. And he appears in
Yeah.
two scenes, by the way. This
Yeah.
does
Yeah.
not matter to people back then. Number
Yeah.
three, does anybody realize that this editor has two phones on his desk?
Yep.
What's that about?
Yeah. You got two phones.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yep.
What's going on?
Yep.
He
Yeah, you
got two
got two
phones on his
on his
desk.
desk.
He's got two phones on his desk, and his nameplate says editor.
Yeah.
Even he doesn't care what his name is.
Yeah.
And
While we're criticizing this scene, the lack of question mark on what really upsets me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and
That's
then
that's
one
that's like
last
a what?
thing.
Mm-hmm.
I thought this part was hilarious. Hurry, Kent, a phone tip. Wife beating at 211 Court Avenue. I'm on my way. The next panel. At 211 Court Avenue. It's like,
Yeah.
we get it.
Like he went straight there. He didn't stop and get him a burger or nothing. He just went straight there and went to beating the brakes off this guy.
I think
know.
we established that, Jerry.
If you don't put the address, people might think he stopped at another wife beating on the way.
It's like, man, how would hey, common problem, But
as socially progressive as this comic is, him saying you're not fighting a woman now, Superman.
yeah, right, yeah, which and it's and we give people grace because they're trying to figure this mess out, but this is probably one of my top 2 or 3 favorite parts of the book. This is when we first are introduced to Lois, and once we're introduced to Lois, her personality in that first panel, like you pretty much already know who she is, right? You know, because he basically is like, hey, you know, why don't you let me take you out tonight or whatever? You know, Clark is like, you know, and then she pretty much is like, all right, man, I'll throw you a bone this time, man. Come on. Right.
Suppose
You
I'll
see
give
what I'm
you a
saying?
break for a change.
Yeah, you know. And so I think that, you know, for a character like Lois and what she would later become, like that template was already set.
Yeah.
And it was set in the first issue. So this is why all of the other like misogynistic stuff that we see with the whole damsel in distress trope that you see a lot in Western literature, and I really, really hate it, by the way. But that them putting that in the comic, we see how that had a pernicious influence on Lois as a character for years. She's pretty much recovered from it now. But
Lois is a damsel in distress, not because she's a weak woman. She's a
yeah,
damsel in distress because she gets in way over her head
right, right, right. And
by
it's
choice.
just yeah, it's and you know, it's a part of her personality, obviously, because she feels like she can take on the world. And it's as a result of her job, she has to kind of be in the thick of things. And but you know, once you get to the point where she's like, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll go out here and I'll just climb up to the top of this building and I'll fall off and Superman will catch me.
I'm sure you'll
And
catch
then, yeah, you know what I mean? That kind of stuff. And then, you know, I can grab him and hug him and kiss him and all this other stuff I can't normally do. You know, so then I'm like, okay, man, you know, this is crazy. So even as a child, I thought something was wrong with that, right? So a
Yeah.
lot of those issues, like I just like as an adult, it's like, man, I can't read this stuff. You know what I mean? And that was not really the stuff I liked anyway. Like this was the stuff I liked because you know,
I
like this,
I love this panel where he's asking her out, and then there's this like really cramped in caption later, and
yeah.
then the next panel there's this gigantic caption that says "that night" with like a crap load of space around it. Like
Right.
you can tell they haven't figured out comic book storytelling.
Yeah, they haven't figured it out yet. And the funny thing about it is that it looks like a marquee that you see like on the top of a diner or something, you know, like
Yeah.
the Eat at Joe's sign that you always see in the old cartoons and stuff. So they're like, yeah, we don't know what we're doing. We're gonna style it out though, right? So you know, and it's just really interesting. Like the first time we see Lois actually doing something, it shows you how she's a part of this whole thing about the whole theme of action. Because the first thing she does in the comic book is slap somebody.
Yep.
You see what I'm saying? That's
She's,
the first thing she
and
does.
what's his name, Paul?
Butch.
So
could you come up with a more stereotypical gangster name? Which, by the way, nothing says they're gangsters.
Right.
Yeah.
They could just be a bunch of jerks.
Right. Which, you know, hey, you know, it probably, you know, same thing, you know. So it's funny though, because Lois actually got to him before Superman did. And that's like one of my favorite parts of this comic is that you know, he comes up and, you know, he's, you know, trying to do his thug stuff. And then, you know, Clark is kind of, you know, he's being sheepish or whatever like that. And then she basically is like, hey man, listen, you know, we getting out of here. I'm going home now. Let's go. And then, you know, then the dude try to step in the middle of it and he gets a snot box rocked. And then, you know, they get in the car and then he mushes Superman in the face. And then Lois is like, I'm out of here. And then this is when the shenanigans pop off, right?
Yeah.
So, and then you have another one of those yellow panels a few minutes later, you know.
It's not like they couldn't have used more space. They could have totally used this space too.
Yeah, you know.
They could have put another grasshopper in there.
Yeah, another grasshopper, you know.
You know what
And
else though that I think is interesting is Lois and Clark. Clark says this says here reluctantly Kent adheres to his role of a weakling. But that's the first time he's actually showing that, because the previous scenes of Clark Kent, he's actually comes off just as like a regularly competent reporter.
Yeah.
So this again, we know he's supposed to act like he's a weakling, but if you're reading this for the first time, that might take you a little bit by surprise.
Yeah. Yeah, because he's been handling business even as Clark up until this point.
Yeah.
You know, he's been doing his thing, you know. And this is the part from this is the reference to the cover, because back then, I know that this is kind of like a novel concept now, but covers were originally intended to give you an idea of what was happening in the story. Okay. And that's for you guys out there that create comics. Okay, I'm gonna just leave it at that. But we're gonna move on. Now, in this particular issue, of course, they've kidnapped Lois, and Superman. They driving down the highway. Superman is there before they get there, and he's standing out in front of the car. Then he jumps over the car and starts chasing it.
There's really no point to this. We've already established from the first page that he's more powerful than a train.
And all of this is happening at night, right? And so the only thing they're doing, because you can't do the coloring tricks that you can do today, you had a pretty flat palette.
It's the thing.
So so they're using a lot of strokes hatching. And then they're using that, and it actually comes off really, really well. So there's no mistaking. And then there's white space like close to the car that is supposed to represent the headlights, or whatever. So it comes off really, really good, and it's really, really creative.
Also, by the way, speed lines, a lot of people think that was invented either by Carmine Infantino, Jack Kirby, or Osamu Tezuka. Joe Shuster's using it right here.
Yeah, that's already in play. This is how I know who's actually read this comic and who hasn't, right? Because there's speed lines all over this thing. And then you actually get the moment that's a reproduction from the or not a reproduction from the cover, but it's the same image that's on the cover with Superman smashing the car, and but first he picks the car up, turns it on its side, and shakes everybody out. Right.
And do you realize one of them is Lois Lane?
Yes.
Yeah. Get out of there, Lois.
He's falling upside down, by the way. And she's in a dress.
It's funny though, because Superman he singles out Butch, right? Because Butch was driving the car. He singles him out. He's like, "Hey, Butch, hold up, man. Let me tell you something real quick, right?" And then he grabs him, and then he takes him and like puts him up a telephone pole, and he hangs him off the telephone pole by his pants, right?
Yep. By his pants.
And then there's the main panel from this next one is Superman. He's basically telling Lois that's like, hey, you don't need to be afraid of me. I'm not gonna.
She's terrified of him. And you know why? Because he just picked up a car, turned it upside down, and shook her out of it.
Right. You know what
Like, I've seen that panel shared by people saying, "Oh, look at Superman. This sums him up. He won't hurt you. He'll protect you." And I think Alex Ross has painted it. And it's supposed to be this inspirational panel, but it's like, but it's a funny panel. It's a joke. Like,
Alex Ross has painted it twice, and he used different palettes twice. So one of them actually resembles this more, and it looks really sinister.
Yeah. But that's the joke of the panel. I mean, it's got to be deliberate, hasn't it? Superman's leaning into it going, "I'll look after you." And she's like, "What?"
Like, dude.
I mean,
So,
seriously. I'm going to share my screen here.
Mm-hmm.
Like really quickly.
Oh, wow.
That is not a woman who is who is unafraid of the person she's meeting for the first time.
Right.
I mean, Ross has nailed it there, because the look on Superman's face, he's taking the piss, isn't he? Like,
It's like, yeah.
I know. It's like, I know I turned the car upside down and just shook you out of it. You probably have a concussion, but hey, I ain't gonna hurt you. Don't worry about it.
There's another one. Like I said, he's painted it twice. So let me share this one as well. Okay, so it's this one as well. Let me just open it up.
Yeah, yeah. That one is the one in particular that gets passed around a lot.
Because she doesn't look scared there. She looks amazed, and the
Yeah.
sort of the mocking expression on Superman's face is in shadow, so
Hmm.
it's completely not what the panel's about. That one, which I
Yep.
assume was deliberate on Ross's part.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Mm.
But then in the comic, he then picks her up. That's a great panel, by the way.
Mm.
But then he picks her up, and this is the second time in this comic that we see Superman jumping around with a woman in his arms with a tiny little house that Joe
Yeah,
Shuster decided to draw for perspective.
yeah. And it's funny because him leaping like that and having the stuff underneath, like in between his legs, that becomes kind of a thing to convey him jumping. They're almost always done like this in the beginning. You even see it like a lot of times, like on covers and stuff, or like even in reproductions, it's a common thing, like on like the omnibus books and stuff. You always see it, where it's him, jumping and he's like, but yeah, so it's just an interesting way to like convey that, you know, because when you're talking about somebody jumping high, because of perspective, the figure gets smaller, right? So it's like, how do you do that and keep the shot on the main figure? Like, it's kind of the only way you can do it, you know,
Mm.
and have the face and everything, in place. Yeah.
And of course, Superman tells Lois, I'd advise you not to print this little episode. And what happens next?
She went and printed the joint. Yeah, it's on paper now, baby. Like so that's why I love this part so much.
Everything you need to know about Lois Lane is in this stretch of pages.
That's the. What's really interesting about this, though, is that she's presented as this woman who is being underestimated. One of the first things she says to Clark is that, "Oh, I've been writing sob stories all day." They've got her writing the sob stories. But she's obviously a really competent investigative reporter, and then she comes back to bloody Ian Two Phones.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, look at where editor's name tag is, right.
Yeah,
on the side of the desk.
Because we readers have to be reminded who he is, because he doesn't have a name.
And she's like, I saw Superman last night. That guy that you literally just sent Clark Kent off to investigate, so you know he exists. And the guy's like, "Are you sure it wasn't pink elephants you saw?" And it's like, and it's really obvious that he's treating her like that because she's a woman. Like,
Yeah.
so it's amazing how this strip from 1938 is more progressive than the Lois Lane strips that would be written 20 years later, like you were saying earlier on, LaMar.
That's true. That's true.
And the interesting thing about what you were saying about him not having a name, I kind of think that the reason why it's actually better that he doesn't have a name, because he represents all of these fools in corporate America that think the way he does. So the name isn't necessary, it's the title, right? So, like this scene was playing out in America and still is in pretty much every office in America right now. And it may not be an editor, it may be a CEO, it may be the shift manager or whatever, right? And it's still being played out. So, and just him and the way that he's looking at her, like he's not, like it's clear he's not even taking her serious, right? And so, like Paulie said, that's a really powerful panel because it's showing, and just Lois's body language in the panel, like it's very forceful and in your face. And so, and he's just kind of leaning back, like, man, go somewhere, man. I ain't trying to hear all this right now. You just a little girl. Go over here and, or whatever. You know what I mean? And so, it's just
taking her seriously, and then 2 panels later, he sends Clark off on this major assignment.
Right. And look at it in his body language in that panel where he has this huge text bubble and he's talking to Clark, and his body language is just like, like.
By the way, that text bubble is like, what the hell is that thing?
It's huge. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's like, and he's giving Clark all these details, and it works kind of because they're sitting still. He's not moving around the room or anything. So I guess you could kind of get away with it, right? But just his body language. So it shows you that that they were cognizant of this kind of stuff already, and when we, and I think that this is why this kind of stuff is important, because you know, people miss this kind of stuff when they're reading it for the first time now, because you know, in a lot of ways they're just looking at it like, oh, it's just this old antiquated comic, right? But there's a lot of like stuff that's happening here. And like when you just look how his body language shifts from those two panels, you know, it's almost like he's trying to put on for Clark because he's a man, you know, so he's kind of sticking his chest out, you know what I mean? And stuff like that, which is really absurd, you know, as a reader, because we know who Clark is, right? So all the chest puffing ain't gonna help you, you know, but you know, yeah, but I digress.
There's around 60 words in this balloon.
It really sort of puts Lois's attitude to Clark in context, though, because she's not just being mean to Clark because he's a coward.
Oh no, she's pissed off.
Yeah, she's being mean to Clark because he's a coward who gets taken more seriously than her, and she's very much not a coward. Like,
right, exactly. Yep. And you know, it comes off like that, like it's not even like covert. You know, when you read it, it comes off like that. You don't have to reach to try to figure it out. You know, it's like it's right there for you. You know, once again in the next part we have Superman, and he's excuse me, he's at 8:30 in the morning now, because that, you know, you got to know he's there, he's on somebody else's business.
This is
early in the morning.
This is Clark, by the way, being sent on an assignment to the South American Republic San Monte,
right?
And then him deciding to instead take the train to Washington D.C., a train that looks suspiciously a lot like a train Billy Batson would take later on a few years later.
Hey, you know.
It actually doesn't look anything like it, but still.
Yeah, you know. But yeah, this one's funny because Superman keeps finding himself in these crazy situations, like looking back on it. So in this one, he's just hanging outside of the window, eavesdropping, you know, 8:30 in the morning. You know what I mean? So it's like, hey, they get started, I get started early too. You know what I mean? And you know, he's too far, you know, people aren't looking that high up because he's in a skyscraper or whatever. So, you know, then, you know, he makes his appearance, obviously probably coming through the window, because he's going to bust up the deal. And then the next thing you know, he's dragging a guy out of the window.
This is him, by the way, getting a corporate lobbyist for a senator.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, this whole thing is it takes place within the political realm. Now,
this whole thing is a commentary on what was then current events.
Right, absolutely. And then Superman grabs the guy in the purple suit and the derby, which you kind of see as like, now it's established that all of these guys that are, you know, that are reprobates, they're all wearing purple suits, it seems like. But Superman grabs him and he's basically like, unhand me, sir, like that, right? And then the next thing you know, they up and out the window.
He just takes his foot. All right,
that's what we'll do just like, all right, we out, you know. So he was like, yeah, I'll let go of your hand, I just grab your foot, we out of here. So then he starts running across the power lines, which, if you remember from our tape on Superman Smashes the Klan, that was something that was put in place, because that comic takes place a little bit after this one as far as the chronology and stuff. And so then and this brings the Superman story here, because Action Comics is an anthology. So there's other characters that were introduced in subsequent stories in the issue. But then he's like, yeah, I'm gonna take you we going down to the Capitol. So then he's running across the power lines, and he's once again having fun with his powers. And there's also real science at play, because you can walk across a power line and won't get shocked as long as you don't touch the pole and the line at the same time. That's how birds can sit on them and they don't get electrocuted. So
and then almost touched that pole.
Yeah. So this guy is obviously scared out of his mind, and so he's like, oh, well, there's the Capitol building there. So then he's like, we'll just jump over there. And then Superman, and then of course he's like, this guy's like, no, and then he's like, oh, missed it, you know.
And that's how it ends. That's how this issue ends.
And yeah, I love that. Ends. Just like
Yep.
we end part one when we run out of space. You know, it's
Right.
not.
Yep.
It's not like a cliffhanger, really. It's just
Yeah.
like,
No.
yeah, no more space. You
Yeah.
know.
It's like at this point, it's like, yo, we know we got you. You're going to be back for number two. And then so it don't really matter how this one ends. You coming back anyway because you've never seen anything like this, right? So and then this is the first time you see Superman with like his breaking the chains with his chest in that last
Yeah, that
panel.
surprised
Yeah,
me because that's such an iconic thing that's been
yeah,
homaged a billion times,
yeah.
with Neil Adams and Alex Ross and
Yep.
everyone else. And I knew it started from Joe Shuster, but I
Mhm.
had completely forgotten that it was there from the very beginning.
Yep. Yep. And I think that people will be surprised if you actually go back and read this comic. For those of you who haven't read it, I think you'll be surprised at the things that actually make it into the modern day, because there's a lot of timeless themes here. So we tend to look at things after the fact as being dated and antiquated and stuff, instead of looking at it and like, hey, these ideas are still viable, and there's a reason for that, right? So, and it's interesting to me that Superman kind of works his way up as at first he's dealing with like wife beaters and things like that. Then he works his way up to like these
This
crooks
politicians.
and
Yeah.
these politicians. Then he works up to politicians. So he's kind of the threat level is going up and up and up and up and up.
Wait, wait,
That's
wait,
just
wait, wait. We don't know that Butch is actually a criminal, okay?
it's
Yeah.
a safe bet. It's a safe bet.
He might just be an arsehole. Well, he's at
Yeah.
least a kidnapper, I suppose.
But
Now,
yeah,
now he's a kidnapper.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So yeah, trust me, Butch is one of those guys that whatever they say he did it. We're not even gonna argue about it, right?
May
So
as
I
well
just
be
think
named Biff.
so you have this idea of Superman's the threat level. So it's like, but I think that also when you look at it, it's a commentary on how you have corruption on small levels, and also you have it on the biggest level you could possibly have it on. So somebody needs to tackle this stuff, right? So I think that that's an underlying theme in this comic, right? And that's just evergreen. Like that'll never go
Absolutely.
away. You know what I mean? It'll never go away. Yeah. So
Absolutely. I find it, we keep bringing it up. This is something that they should be doing more with Superman. It in any incarnation of Superman. Like,
yeah,
all the
Yeah.
sci-fi stuff is great. It's amazing. I love it. But have him tackle stuff that needs to be tackled.
yeah,
You know what I mean?
hmm yeah.
Recently in the Superman comics, Superman's buggered off into space, and his son John Kent is taken over. And last month, Superman, Son of Kal-El, #1 came out, and they kind of hint in that John Kent's going to be, looking into more sort of, real life issues and in this manner. And I hope that's
hmm
true. I hope they don't like bottle out of it or promise what they don't deliver,
Yeah.
because it's a great opportunity, with a young Superman, a Superman who's
hmm
written as like a 17-year-old, to be
Yeah.
tackling this kind of thing. I think that would be a fantastic opportunity, and I really hope they take it.
Yeah.
Yes,
And
I'm
cue
really
the internet
happy.
outrage.
I'm really happy that they're doing he's fighting for truth, justice, and a better world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, wait a minute. Now that you said that, that wasn't the weren't the reprobates mad about that a couple weeks ago?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
I thought so. Yeah.
But
Okay.
they're always mad about it because every like 5 or 10 years or so, someone will write a comic where Superman doesn't say the American way. He'll just say truth and justice. Some clickbait site
You
will
did
make
it
a
in
big deal
Superman
about it.
Returns. I mean, Superman versus the Amazing Spider-Man, 1976.
Right.
It was truth,
Yeah.
justice, and the Terran way,
Yeah. Which sounds ridiculous,
which sounds
actually.
ridiculous. That's true. And but I mean, come on, guys. This is like it's the equivalent every time the word America is used. So it's like every time he doesn't say the American way, or every time Captain America questions the moral fiber of America at the moment, people go nuts about it. I'm like, read a comic.
Well, there we go. Action Comics #1, first appearance of Superman, and he's taking on corrupt politicians. He's not an upholder of the status quo, and he never, he was never designed to be that.
Right.
No.
Absolutely. Yep. Yep. But you
To the
can't tell them that though, because they
to
know
the
everything.
to the extent that he became that, it was really only because he had to. There was
Yeah.
no if he was gonna go on with that whole thing, as powerful as he became in the Silver Age, the world would look completely different
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
if he
And
changed
and
everything.
also there's a certain level of fame you get to with a character, I guess, and you can't do much when they become your brand. You can't, like Mickey Mouse is the most boring Disney character, but he never used to be when he was first created. He was
Yeah.
way more interesting. But
Yeah.
once a character becomes a brand, there's only so much you can do with them, I guess.
Yeah.
Which again, while this is a perfect opportunity with Superman, Son of Kal-El, to have Superman doing some interesting stuff because John Kent, he's not the brand. They can always just say, "Oh, well, he's not Superman. He's Superman's son," so they can have him do some, out there stuff like.
Mhm.
And I really hope they grasp that opportunity.
Plus,
Yeah.
also like DC, you have a multiverse.
Well, yeah, yeah, exactly.
Mhm. And I guess, I know a lot of people were upset that they kind of aged him up 10 years, because they had gotten used to him being a pre-adolescent child and all of that. But I guess if you're going to maximize that, this is kind of the direction you go in, right? So I think that, I haven't read it yet. I haven't read the new ones yet or whatever, but I guess that's probably a good idea to do it that way. But like you said, it's like, you always have to wonder now because things get canceled so quick. So it's like, how long are they going to allow that to happen before they cancel the book, right? So, and unfortunately, those are things you have to worry about now that, like the 40-year-old me has to worry about that. The 4-year-old me didn't really have to, right?
I think it's
But
safe because Tom Taylor's a pretty well respected and well selling writer.
mhm.
I think that's going to be okay.
Okay, yeah.
But we'll
I
see.
guess it depends how far Tom Taylor pushes it and whether anyone high up in Warner Brothers notices it. Because, of
Mhm.
course, as we saw with when DC published Batman's Willie, which I can't believe I'm even saying, the higher ups at Warner Brothers do get scared and then start to interfere at certain points. That, not that I'm particularly in favor of Batman's Willie being published. I'm not going to die on that hill. But it's an example of higher ups getting scared.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
You know
yeah.
what happened when Batman's Willie got published? That was when DC let go of Second Coming, which is the comic about Jesus moving in with a Superman type character.
So yeah, they get
Right.
higher
Yeah.
ups get scared. Yeah.
Yeah, because they
Mhm.
were like, well, we don't need more of this kind of publicity. But also, like, I was reading Dragon Hoops. It's that Gene Luen Yang autobio comic. And he has this one sequence in it where he gets a call about possibly working on Superman, which Gene Luen Yang
Mhm.
is working on Superman right now.
Mhm.
Um, but the call was DC editorial calling him and saying, we finally have approval from the higher ups that we can expose Superman as Clark Kent. And wouldn't it be great if Lois is the one who betrays him? And I'm like, you need approval from the higher ups, like higher than DC Comics, to tell what kind of stories you can tell in the comics, even if it's just like, obviously somebody's going to put this genie back in the bottle at some point. He's going to
Right.
get his secret identity back, but you need approval for that. So somebody like Superman like requires so many levels of approval for even anything exciting to happen, really.
Yeah.
But this Superman in Action Comics #1, where they made it and then they sold it, there's just an energy there that's not
Mm.
that's
Yeah.
all its own. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of it has to do too with you know it takes a lot of time to make a comic, right? So you have people who, over probably because they're coming up with something that had never been done before. So you're talking about it went through its early ideas and stuff like that, and Superman was kind of fashioned as, in a lot of ways, in his earliest iteration before he became what we know now. In a lot of ways, you see it in Brainiac later. You see it, of course, in Lex Luthor later, and things like that. But when they took it and turned it on its head, it's like, okay, we got to work this stuff out. That takes time, you know? So you have these people putting this creative energy over, months and sometimes even years. And this is what they're doing. And so there's an immediacy there, right? Because there's no whole like, hey, listen, I got to run this past, such and such to see if they can talk to such and such about it. You know what I mean? Like you don't have that here. So the energy of that goes into the work, and it's easy to see it. Like it's not even something that, if you're not looking, you won't catch it. It's just there.
Absolutely.
Whereas, sometimes comics now, they even though, we know that they're scripted, of course, because these aren't real people. I know some of y'all have yet to come around to that idea out there, but but some of these stories, they feel like they're over scripted to the point sometimes that you can read them and say, it's like, wow, I can't believe they okayed that. But when you're reading the story, that's the last thing you should be thinking, right? So it's a testament to the industry that it created.
Absolutely.
And in the best way possible. You know what I mean? And I think just to appreciate what these guys did with this character, and they went around the world with this thing. That's amazing. Like just to think about it, right? It's just an idea that went around the world and back again. It's dope just to kind of think about it.
It's hard to think about what comics would have been if Superman had never shown up. It's impossible.
Like, dude, we might not be having this conversation right now. You know what I'm saying? Like
about pirate comics or cowboys or something.
Right.
To crime comics. Yeah. Like, might just be completely different. Or maybe the Phantom would have just gotten really, really big. I don't know.
Quite cool, but to see a glimpse of what might have been, we just got to look at the rest of Action Comics, because
that's true.
All the other strips in Action Comics, they're bloody dreadful. Let's face it,
they're not good. I tried reading them, and they're not good.
I read them all the way through this morning, and they're like, you can really see why Superman stood out. Because something that struck me is that they're all about the same guy. Chuck Dawson, the cowboy, Zatara, the magician, Scoop Scanlan, the reporter. There's
it's standard. There's a bad guy.
Yeah, there's a bad guy. And they are all, even Zatara, who is in a dinner suit and a top hat and a cape, is still this square-jawed, blonde-haired guy. Like, they haven't even drawn a mustache on him. Like, they've just got like Chuck Dawson or Scoop Scanlan and stuck a top hat on him. Like,
Zatara, who is most famous for being Zatanna's dad.
Yeah. Claim to fame right there. And it's funny because it's like you have these other characters like what you were talking about. Like, who cares about Scoop Scanlan in a comic book with Superman in it, right? Like, who's gonna care, right? It's funny because they just was like, all right, man, look, this is an anthology book. We trying different things. We got to keep this other stuff in line, man. Just write the story, about the reporter. What's the boy name again? What I'm saying? So it's like, yeah, put him in there, man. We'll see what happens.
There's a cowboy called Tex Thompson. He's not even the only cowboy he's not even the only DC character called Tex Thompson.
No, he's not. No, he's not. Yep. That's absolutely correct. And doesn't the Spectre debut in this issue too?
No, he doesn't.
Not this one. Not on the copy I've got.
Okay.
He's not here. There's a guy named Pep Morgan.
Okay.
Oh yeah, I forgot about him. Yeah.
To be fair to this, isn't he? To be fair to this Pep Morgan strip, it's just the whole thing about boxing.
No, it's actually kind of dope if you like boxing. You know what I mean?
Pet
Yeah,
Morgan's my favorite strip next to Superman, I think, but that's
yeah,
not saying much.
yeah. Yeah. Like I don't know if I would read like 24 pages of that, but for what it was or whatever, it was actually kind of fly. If I'm remembering it right. It's been a while since I've read action cover to cover.
But
One of the stars is Marco
interestingly,
Polo.
well,
One of the stars
interestingly,
is
the
Marco. Oh
Pep
God.
Morgan is done by Fred Gardner, who also did Zatara,
Right.
which is
Uh-huh.
just like, look, sometimes it's really just the concept. Zatara is a
Yeah.
boring strip,
Yeah.
and Pep Morgan's about 4 pages of people boxing.
Yep.
There's a strip about Marco Polo, and even Marco Polo's a square jawed kind of
Right.
like.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think we pretty much covered it all, right?
I got one last question.
Okay.
In the absence of the Superman logo, that iconic Superman logo, with the three-dimensional thing, is
Uh-huh.
Action Comics not like an amazing logo? Look at that
Yes,
thing.
it is. Yes, it
Yeah.
is. I'm gonna. Matter of fact, since you brought that up, Dewey, we will get your thoughts on it, and then we'll go to Paulie.
Look at just, first of all, the font looks great, but look at just the way it's slanted. It's like, that's right, we're moving forward here. And the A goes all the way down here, and then the N goes all the way over there, and it's just like, this is forward motion. Action. Let's go. It's an amazing looking logo. I love that logo.
It's like they've taken some sort of correct me if this is the wrong style, but like maybe like an Art Deco kind of font, but they've like slanted it and like sort of pushed it forward, like you say, and made something different with it. So it's like the comics on its own is quite a sort of 1930s looking font. But then what they've done with this is amazing, and it's still the logo for Action
It's
Comics
still the
today,
logo today.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
which is pretty amazing. I think they may have changed it occasionally, but they've always gone back to it.
It's very rare to retain the same logo like all these years later. There's
They're
what
not
there's
using the same Detective Comics font, to my knowledge.
there's never been a good Detective Comics logo, I
Mm,
think, because it's always
Mm-hmm.
been like something, and then you got to put Batman in it somewhat, because the logo on its own isn't really that great.
mm.
There's this, and there's Amazing Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's all I can think of. That's literally all I can think of. Everything else has
Yeah.
changed.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because even when they change, they always go back to it. You know what I mean? Like like the Spider-Man logo too, the Amazing Spider-Man, they always go back to it, and there's a reason for that. So with this one though, like you said, when they put the lean on it, like you said, it gives you that feeling of motion, so you kind of know what you're into, and then you see how big the logo is, right? So it's like it's out there, and then you have the cover, it's almost like underneath, you know what I mean? So just that in and of itself, it kind of just is almost like, hey man, listen, pick the corner of the page up and turn it and open the book. Like it makes you want to see what's in the joint, like physically, like because it makes you want to just pick it up because it's almost pointing to you. Like when you read Meta Nature, for example, the figures they point to the end that you start reading at. So you can just find like an animal or something, and whichever way it's facing, they're telling you start reading from this side. This right here has the same kind of thing. So it's literally pointing you into like the where the page opens up at. You know what I mean? There's a lot that just goes on in this stuff, man. And I think that we don't appreciate it the way we should. And you talking about something that's going on 100 years ago, right?
I
Like
do
that.
wonder how much of that is Schuster not drawing a full cover.
Hey, that could be it too. You know what I mean? If somebody might have looked at that John and been like, hey, or he could have drawn the full cover and just didn't have a whole bunch at the top, and we're like, okay, we're gonna cut it off right here.
At
You
the
know?
top, it's all grasshoppers.
Yeah, grasshoppers and ants.
It's like that big boom, and then grasshoppers
Yeah.
and ants.
Yeah. So yeah, it's just it's a really amazing. Even the way they laid the actual cover out. Like today, there's all sorts of stuff on covers. You have the artist and the writer and all of that kind of stuff. So you have all of that, but it's basically just an idea selling itself. because that's ultimately what it comes down to. You have to look at the cover to even want to pick it up, because and this is for anybody who's never seen like a newsstand before. Go and look at like these images of like newsstands from like the 20s and the 30s. There were hundreds of publications when you would go down to the corner to buy a newspaper or whatever. So you were competing with the newspaper, you were competing with Time Magazine, you were competing with whatever like little local journals or whatever that were being published then and there. You had to compete with pretty much all of the print media in the world. And this is the kind of stuff you had to do. So even if you don't see the cover, because it could be stuck behind something that's a bigger seller, you have to have that big bold print there to make you be like, oh, what is this? You know? So because in a lot of ways, this was kind of a do or die situation. Like you're only going to get one shot at it, you know, and we see what happened, right? So
we know Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster took this strip all around all of these publishers. National Periodical, which became DC Comics, was not a big company back then. They took a chance on it.
Yeah.
And it paid off for them. Didn't quite pay off for Siegel and Schuster, but it paid off for them.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I think we covered everything. So what we're gonna do?
I can't believe we talked about this for like an hour and a half.
That's what we do around here. You know. So we're gonna close out. And Paul, I'm gonna start with you, and then Duy, you can go after him, and I'll close it up out.
So yeah, it's just one of the greatest comics of all time, even though it was drawn by a teenager and it's really crude and the rules of comics hadn't been sorted yet. I suppose it's like the Beatles, isn't it? Because the whole thing about the Beatles was like they were kids and they didn't know the rules, so they didn't know they were breaking them, and they ended up innovating. And I suppose it's the same with Siegel and Schuster. You know, they were kids. The rules of comics hadn't even been invented or nailed down yet, so they're literally making it up as they go along, and they end up pushing things forward with it. So I just compare everything to the Beatles, I think. But yeah, so it's just an amazing comic, and reading Action Comics as a whole with all the other crappy strips in it really just shows you how amazing it was, how much it would have stood out in 1938. And I kind of wish, if I had a time machine, I probably would go back to America in 1938 to pick up a copy, just to see it on the newsstands in context. Which is probably a really rubbish use of a time machine, but there we go.
No, it's okay. We allow that.
Yeah. Never mind, baby Hitler. You know,
I'm just gonna say, you know, come at me, people. Paul is the only one of us here who could go back to America in 1938 unscathed.
Yeah,
that's a good point, actually.
Yeah.
We'll tell you what, I'll pick up a copy for both of you as well.
Appreciated.
Yeah. At 10 cents a pop, I'm paying for everybody. You know.
Then the people will carbon date it and be like, "This is only a year old." But somehow it's genuine.
I imagine I'd probably have to cut my hair, but you know, I'll just
sacrifice
my trousers up. You know,
sacrifices.
Yeah. You're gonna have to cut the hair back and hike your pants up like Fred Mertz. You know what I mean? Yeah.
I've already got the suspenders.
I think this is a great comic, especially. We at the beginning of this episode, LaMar, you likened Schuster to Jack Kirby, and I don't think anybody in this group or anybody alive who's ever lived will say that, you know, Schuster is on the level of Kirby as an artist.
Mm-hmm.
But there is, you know, it does foreshadow that kind of thing, that kind of movement and action, no pun intended. And I love that everything in this in the strip, like everything is just moving. He's just going. He's going from one place to another. It literally does feel like a kid made it up, because it's like, all right, yeah, he can run really fast. He can't get hurt. Blah 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 blah. Oh, and by the way, he does this. Boom. Oh, and also, he likes a girl, but that's not the focus of the comic. Ew. So, and it's, again, like I said, it's just impossible. It's impossible to figure out what comics would be like without it. But if you really want to try, just read the rest of Action Comics #1. It's not very good. Action Comics #1 was retold in Secret Origins Volume 2 #1 in a story by Roy Thomas and drawn by the great Superman artist Wayne Boring and inked by the great Superman artist Jerry Ordway. LaMar?
Yeah. Yeah, Superman, man. Like what a concept. I know a lot of people, they tend to kind of look at Superman like he's boring or whatever, right? But if you read this comic and you come away from it like Superman is boring in this comic, and I wish I would have never read it, you need your head checked, and we're not going to listen to you about what your mama's name is. That's just, it's just there's so much happening in this book, and it's not even like a full comic, you know? And it's like every panel and the transitions from page to page, which is important, especially in a short story. Like there's not really a moment wasted, right? Because like I said, you kind of know, especially when you're a teenager, you're only going to get one shot at it. So you have to kind of throw everything into it, and make it work as best you can. And they maximized what they were able to do with the space they had. Like, and it's very, very clear. Like what you guys were saying about the rest of the stories. It's like you can compare Action Comics #1 to any story in that book, and then you won't remember anything that happened in any of the other stories. You just won't, right? Um, and to this day, Action Comics #1, I think it you have to put it in a top 10. I'm gonna say that you have to put it in a top 5. And there's been a lot of great comics that have come out since then. But we just kind of tend to, because things have kind of like evolved over time, we forget about stuff like this a lot of the times. But just in rereading it, like it's still pertinent, unfortunately, right? But it's still timely, and it just goes back to people who say certain things and postulate certain ideas. And it's like, it's like if we got it at the first one, if it's there in the first one, you can't make that comment, because it's not like it happened 10 years after the fact. Like, no, out the gate, we come in like this. So you can't say the things that you guys like to say a lot of the times, right? So I think that we kind of take it for granted. It's a book we take for granted. And I would just tell anybody, man, go back and read it, pick up a reprint. They're really easy to get. You can probably go to the back issues, get it for $1. Just pick it up and check the book out. We promise that you won't regret it, unless you just got some other stuff going on, that some existential stuff that you just don't want to deal with. But yep. I guess we're probably done. So Dewey is going to put up the links and all of that stuff in the corners and all of that kind of stuff. And we're going to check y'all next time. This was a lot of fun too.
Hey, Paul, if they ever do a story where this Superman dies, are you going to bury that too?
Yes, definitely.
Got it. Got it.